What's going on, YouTube? Got a new knife review here for you. This is of the Stephen Kelly Collision full custom folder, flipper as well. Stephen Kelly is a custom knife maker out of Big Fork, Montana. I'm sure any city in Montana or town in Montana is going to be pretty small. But it's kind of cool just to see these knife makers coming from these really small towns, and even Chris Reeve, granted he's from South Africa, but setting up shop out in Idaho. So just these smaller states in the sense of population and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's just cheaper to set up shop there and all that kind of stuff. But Hinder in Ohio, Stephen Kelly out in Montana. So this is a folder that I knew nothing about. Just a couple of weeks ago, and I saw it on the forums for sale, and right when I saw the pictures I was like, man, that is an amazing knife and I've got to get my hands on it. So yeah, I was able to get this at a reasonable price. Still pretty expensive, but this one is decked out with lightning strike carbon fiber inlays, full titanium scales, flipper. You just see some of the file work on this knife, on the pocket clip here, on the spine of the handles. Just this really ornate file work, which is just awesome. Back spacers, titanium, which has some of this file work in it as well. And then even on the flipper you get some file work on both sides. And this texture, is kind of nice, so it gives you a little bit of traction as you're flipping. So looking at the blade here, there's even the pivot screw has some markings on it. But that's something I think I've seen stock from knife makers or knife kit providers and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, when you look at the blade shape, this is really what drew me to the blade. One, it's super stout blade, I think around 3/16 of an inch thick, of either CPM 154 or S35 VN. Most of the places that I've been looking at recently shows that he's been using S35, but I think when I bought it, I think the guy was saying that it's CPM 154, which is totally good. The powdered metallurgy of 154 cm. Anyway, so you see this multi-ground kind of tanto blade, just a very thick, very high profile knife. Usually in knives, where the blade is sticking out of the frame, I'm usually not overly attracted to that kind of style, but for this one, definitely made an exception. And I love the look, and I love the shape, and I love the strength of this knife. Definitely reminds me a lot of my Kirby Lambert here. So this one, got to flip it over here. This is the Orion Mgt, so multi-ground tanto. You see on the Stephen Kelly, the tanto is even more stout than the Kirby Lambert here. Flipping over, it's a symmetrical grind, so it's got the multi-ground on both sides, versus the Kirby Lambert having just the one grind over here versus on this other side. So the Kirby Lambert definitely is a very unique shape. If you guys remember, the spine of this blade is not symmetrical, asymmetrical, so it's kind of interesting, Kirby style in design and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, just looking at this knife, blade stock and all that kind of stuff, it's a very extremely strong knife, extremely smooth knife. Inside, I don't know exactly how the licensing works for knife makers, being that I don't make knives myself, but internally it's definitely an IKBS system. You've just got a cutout on the frame, and then you've got the ball bearings that are just sitting loosely in there. So from what I understand, that's what IKBS is. It's not, it's not a race, a bearing race like the KVT system, or even like the GTC system that some knife makers are using. They're loose ball bearings. So usually you see, whether it's on the pivot or whether it's on the blade, little IKVS emblem and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know, unless it's something that Steve Kelly did himself. But so anyway, say what you will about that. Going back to the knife, it is a flipper design. You can kind of just see this pretty small flipper, and it's also a very sharp and hard cut flipper. So if you don't push it right, or if you push it a lot of times, it can hurt your finger, this edge right here. But basically just pulling from here, and then the IKBS just allows the blade to just fly out. Just a very smooth reverse grip is just it's pretty comfortable. Again, with this flipper, it serves as a finger guard, but because of the sharp edge, it definitely can dig into your finger if you're not holding it right, or if you impact something. Foregrip, very comfortable. Your index finger kind of sits along there, no problems at all. A little bit of a thumb ramp on this side. Again, just it's such a high profile blade. Yeah, it's just I've been using this knife and carrying it around for the past week or so, and I just love having it in my pocket. It's just such a capable blade. I had to sharpen it up on my wicked edge because the peak of the recurve right here was completely dull. But after a couple swipes on my wicked edge, this thing is it's crazy sharp, especially this belly. It's been interesting seeing a lot of I've been seeing a lot of new knives out there, that have been coming out with a recurve, a slight recurve blade, and then having the tip have a belly, whether it's Tanto or not. It seems like a pretty popular one. One of my contacts, John Grimsmo, just a great guy. He puts up some awesome videos because he shows all the processes of making a knife. His new knife, the Norseman, I didn't get a chance to pick that one up, and I kind of regret it because it just looks awesome, and people have been saying really great things about the knife, and there's been all these follow-up videos. But that knife is a recurve Tanto, of RWL 34, and it just seems like a very capable blade. So before I really did not like recurves in my blades, basically because I thought it would be a real big pain to sharpen and all that kind of stuff. But with the wicked edge, it hasn't been a problem at all. Pocket clip is just this thick, huge chunk of titanium, milled out of one chunk. It retains really well, even though it doesn't sit flat on the frame. But because it's so stiff, it just rides in the pocket pretty well. Sits in about that high in your pocket, which is not too bad. It's actually a pretty big blade. It's 3 3/8 inch long, with an overall length of about 8 1/8 maybe inches. So again, for my hands, medium-sized hands, it's really comfortable in both grips, whether forward or reverse. One thing about this knife, as I kind of do some size comparisons right here. Here's the ZT 551. The Hinder is basically the same size knife here, with a slightly longer blade maybe from the pivot. And then of course you got the Sebenza. One thing about this knife in particular, and I don't know if this is how it was at a shop, or given that it was from the secondary market and that kind of stuff, the lock bar on this collision is especially stout. Right here, you guys know from the frame lock, the frame lock is basically how strong the cutout is here. So if you have a very thin cutout on the frame lock, sorry, there's a jet that just flew right over our building here. But if the cutout is too far in, basically the strength of your titanium frame lock is just this tiny piece of titanium, so it's going to flex in and out. And I've done my fair share of like tweaking titanium frame locks. You know, if it's not tight enough, then I'll, you know, take the knife apart and flex it so there's a little bit more spring and all that kind of stuff. You know, even when you look at, you know, the Sebenza, it's got the cutout here, you know, and Chris Reeve does his little, you know, double scalloping cutout, and then even on this side, you know, there's the little bit of cutout here, so it allows for the titanium to flex quite a bit. But you know, I'll just compare this one to the 551 here. You know, we all know the 551 has got this huge chunk of, you know, titanium. You know, the slab on here is really, really thick, but the cutout on this knife is extremely thin. When you compare it to the cutout here, you know, even though they're oppositely cut out, so this cutout, you know, is on the outside, or actually on the inside of the frame. This one's on the outside. I don't know if you can compare the two here, but on the Steve Kelly, the collision, it's so much thicker than this one right here. So I believe that this frame lock is much stronger, you know. So compared to the Hinder, compared to the Sebenza, the Steve Kelly it's all thicker. It's thicker than the rest of these knives. The Hinder is actually really thin, is what I noticed. This is XM18 3.5 inch. You know, you can tell the titanium cutout right there is pretty thin. And the collision right here, this is really, really thick. The reason I mentioned that is when I got this knife, I noticed, well, first of all, that this this lock bar was extremely, you know, to this side. So it didn't engage the blade or the lock tang all too well, and it would actually not lock, and so there would be a lot of vertical blade play. And so I took this knife apart, and then I was kind of you know, playing around with the bearings, re-greasing it and all that kind of stuff, because it's starting to get a little bit gritty. And I tried to flex this lock bar down a little bit so that, you know, it would have a tighter lockup. Because once it's in here, then this blade it doesn't go anywhere. There's no play vertically, horizontally, whatever. But I was literally, I don't know if you watched John Grimsmo, one of his Knife Making Tuesdays, and he was trying to flex like this sheet of titanium, and he was jumping up and down on it on a counter, and he was just kind of flex the knife like this, or flex the piece of titanium, and you know, just the I think what they call the memory, you know, retention of titanium, you know, it goes back to its original, you know, I guess springiness or whatever. Sorry, I really can't explain it too well, but basically it was so hard to flex this knife or this spring, a spring bar, you know, to have more tension this way. And so I don't know why I bring that up, but basically I think for two things. One is the strength of this bar, you know, is going to be so much higher than most other frame locks that you see. The second is that you have to make sure that this lock bar is right, because otherwise you're going to have a really, really hard time, you know, flexing this piece. Otherwise you have to send it back into the custom maker and all that stuff, so that they can potentially heat treat it in order to flex it a little bit more. Be that as it may, again, I love this knife. Just a quick mention inside here, it's not carbonized on the lock face, but it is heat treated, so you can tell inside there's some discoloration similar to that of the Chris Reeve. You know, when you look at the actual lock bar face, you know, it's discolored because of the heat treat. So that hardens that titanium so that it can sit and interface with the steel tang on here without you know, much damage and all that kind of stuff. All right, so Stephen Kelly collision flipper. This is maybe one of my favorite knives right now in my collection. I love carrying it. I love using it. This tip and all that kind of stuff. I agree with, you know, John Davis's, or J Davis 882, his video about the Norseman and the blade shape. You know, this is actually a very, very useful blade shape, because you can just do all your cutting right here on this surface, and then on the recurve, if you're doing any kind of draw cutting or you know, this kind of cutting, it's very effective. So it kind of just locks in and it just holds in this and the apex of this curve right here. So all right, so anyway, that's the Stephen Kelly collision custom. Just let me know what you guys think down in the comments below, and appreciate you guys watching the video, and I'll see you guys on the next vid. You guys take care. Bye.